Okay, wait a few minutes for folks to join, and then we can kind of kickstart things. I think in 2 minutes, something like that. If that sounds good to y'all. Okay, maybe another minute, and then we can get started here. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. Unlocking success through self-service analytics. I'm your host, Dirk Kaysen, from the caster side. Small little intro about me. I was Caster's first go-to-market hire, and have worked really closely with data teams for the last several years at Fivetran, Caster, and RudderStack. Connor, do you want to maybe introduce yourself?
Sure thing, Dirk. Hi, everyone. I'm Connor Swatling, I'm the head of business intelligence over at Fluid Truck. Fluid Truck is a technology-driven commercial fleet rental company that enables small businesses to access a fleet of vehicles at the push of a button. If you live in almost any city across the United States, the chances are that you've seen one of our cargo vans, box trucks, or pickups driving around town with our big blue F on it. In my role as the head of business intelligence, I oversee the department which focuses on delivering actionable insights through enterprise reporting and forecasts.
Cool. Connor, thanks so much for introducing yourself. Lucas, if you want to take it away.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Dirk?
Yes.
Perfect. I got a note saying my mic wasn't working. So I'm Lucas Smith. I lead our product analytics team at Hudl. For those who don't know, Hudl is a global sports technology company. Chances are, if you have been in a high school sport or know somebody in a high school sport in the US, you have been on or used our platform. But we're more than just a US-based high school platform. We have operations globally across the world. I manage our product analytics team, where we're really focusing on empowering our product managers to use data to drive their strategies and decisions and their operations.
Very cool. Well, Connor, Lucas, great to see you all again, and for joining. I guess is sort of a small agenda for today. Want to very quickly set, just a little bit of a baseline with a couple of slides that we have here, and then the core of today's conversation will really focus on both of your experiences leveraging self-service analytics, whether it be at Hudl or at Fluid Truck. So I guess as a next step, let's set that baseline. And we can talk a little bit about sort of like who each of these folks are, Caster and Whaley. Caster is a data catalog that's built for end business users. That's the easiest data catalog to use in the market, that connects to all of your modern infrastructure and tools. And Whaley are our esteemed partners, have been for a long time, and we're so excited to do this this webinar with them. As a bit of a context here, and let's see if we want to set the next slide. Self-service analytics really enables business users to find, understand, and analyze data that they need without relying on technical teams for support. And this is specifically what Castor and Whaley really specialize in. And Connor, I think that it seems like we've been lucky enough to work with you all in this capacity. But one of the big key takeaways here is that data and analytics leaders who really share data externally tend to generate a lot more economic benefit than those who don't. So the proof's kind of in the pudding. This is from Gartner, a Gartner report from 2021. I think there's a lot of competing different ideologies around whether or not data teams should be structured in a particular way, or only certain folks should have access to the data, things of that nature. But we've seen on the Castor side that this is really sort of our path and a lot of our customers' path to being successful. And then I guess finally, from a goal perspective for today, really want to chat with both of you all about why self-service analytics is really key to driving data adoption and how to measure that success. So I guess this is kind of a first question. Connor, would love to just learn a little bit about your role at Fluid Truck and how the data team is structured, in terms of how your role is scaled, how your hybrid model sort of looks for you, and whether or not it's more centralized or distributed, that kind of thing.
For sure. Yeah, so I think Fluid Truck has grown pretty dramatically over the last 5 years. We had 10 people back in 2017, and now we're up to over 400. When I joined back in 2021, the business intelligence group was a few people trying to migrate our analytics database from legacy systems to our new home in GCP, while also providing these ad hoc reports to senior leadership. So during that time, we were pretty centralized. Reporting was very, very transactional of an event. You had a stakeholder who would ask for something, and then the team would work to turn that something around. Now, we were spending and dedicating a lot of time providing these reports, and our data tech stack was languishing. It was very neglected. And it was getting worse as these new KPIs, these new dimensions and definitions were being established without a really reliable source of truth to back it up. So as the business grew, these new departments started to come online and begin to scale up their own operations, and our product started launching new features. Our platform started having a lot of new tools and widgets that enabled our customers to acquire fleet vehicles for their small business. And as that happened, we had these competing mandates to build a scalable ecosystem, while also quickly delivering reporting content, insights from that ecosystem. So even though we doubled the size of the BI team at this point, the old system of request in, request out, ticket system, it wasn't going to cut it. So I started engaging others in the business who had shown some competency in data manipulation. These were folks with a strong understanding of Excel, right? Or an interest in leveling up their careers in technology. These data champions, we called them, were intimately familiar with the domains in which they operated, and these are individual teams. So they sort of provide this buffer layer between our highest traffic teams, who were responsible for a lot of those requests, and the actual BI space. So it gave us an opportunity for individual team members to engage through this intermediary layer where we had embedded these professional or proficient data producers. So we've started adopting this more hybrid model in the vein of providing teams that ability to service their own requests.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially given where y'all were and kind of where you headed, or where you're headed. I guess to kind of expand on that a little further, like what we've heard and what we've seen, I think, at different organizations is that data isn't really valuable unless it's used, which is which I can assume is really the purpose of the Fluid Truck team setting up like that hybrid structure. Um, and this really leads to a question we've heard from a lot of folks, which is, you know, um, how to best empower business teams with data. Like, how do you approach this at Fluid Truck?
Yeah, solid question. So I would say that's sort of in the vein of data accessibility, right? It's a big challenge because certainly we cannot be experts on everything in this line of work. When you think about breaking down what a vehicle requires to be serviced on the road and be available for our customers, not just available, but in a ready state, and all the components and variables that go into that, all the team members that need to be supported through that, and all the tools we need on the platform side to support business decisions, it's too much for any single group. And a lot of these folks who are on that side in that space help us a lot with that. So for us, the number one problem is simply time. Uh, where does a request fall on the priority list? How can we get that out? How do we make sure that the right people are getting the right things at the right time? Otherwise, we're actually pretty strong with the content we build. It's pretty robust. We can talk more about the tools we use later, but when we deliver something, it has to provide value right away. We can't take time to deliver something that isn't going to be a good ROI for our team. So I think to answer your question, Dirk, I would say everyone should probably develop a metric manifesto, some sort of content guidelines for analysts, which will allow them to understand, what filters should I be using when this sort of request comes through? How do I structure that question to best deliver content? What should that template for that content look like? What historical data do I need to go back in time for? How far should I go back? What's relevant to the stakeholder? And a lot of that is question and answers, but it also requires a deep domain background. I was watching this movie a couple months ago with Bruce Willis. It's called Armageddon. And the core premise is that there's an asteroid coming to Earth, and in order to kind of prevent the threat, they have to send astronauts up, drill into the asteroid, and blow it up. So rather than train astronauts how to drill, they trained drillers how to be astronauts. And I think that's sort of a really good analog for our data champions program. We said, look, we can't be experts on all this stuff. We need to make sure that the people who are experts on that stuff, though, can do the easy work of putting queries together, understanding our definitions, and then simply giving us the tools we need or speaking in our language to do that content production. And then finally, adoption. I think I'm very fortunate that our C-suite is bought in on data as a driving force. If I deliver a report suggesting rentals are down in a market for a given period of time, or that the seasonality has shifted, that we need to reallocate vehicles from one space to another geography, then I can deliver that to the COO, and right away, the department head, myself, and the COO are in a call talking through that and what we can do to fix it. And I think that's sort of a big hang up on adoption for a lot of companies. Becoming data driven is not about making sure the specific person who asked for the report gets the report, but that the report is seen by everyone who can impact it, and that a decision or an action is made. Ultimately, people care about what their boss cares about. So if you don't like what people are saying about your content, your insights, you got to change the conversation and move that up.
I like it. Yeah, and I didn't expect to hear a metaphor around the movie Armageddon today. So thank you so much, Connor. And I guess Lucas, like, wanted to loop you in here too. So you mentioned in the intros that like you sit on the product. I think you said the product analytics team at Hudl,
Yep.
and would love to get more context on your role and how your team fits into the greater data organization.
Yeah, so we've actually just recently undergone our journey from a centralized model of, the centralized data team acting as pseudo gatekeepers while also trying to fulfill this nirvana of self-service, to a decentralized team where we have domain-specific data experts sitting, being able to develop data sources and content. To give everyone some context of the scale of Hudl, we have over 1,000 employees globally, and it's across various domains from sale to product to finance. And so we needed a way to really meet our groups where they were, not necessarily create that extra hurdle to get there. And so we decentralized early this year, late last year, with really the hope that we can do a better job of connecting our producers and consumers with kind of frameworks and models and self-service access. Various tools on the market make that easy, and other tools make it a little harder. And it's the pros and cons. It's kind of that Connor kind of mentioned the dichotomy of self-service and really great data. And so you've really got to kind of wrestle with that. And so we've taken the approach of saying, if we have our analysts within an organization, let's say the product team, really understanding the domain of the product, we can produce better self-service assets that are more that are higher quality, less prone to error and things like that, that will then allow our product team, our focus right now is on product managers, really get in and understand how users are using and interacting with our product, kind of understand how that then impacts our revenue. And obviously, for serving 40 product managers, we have 3 data analysts and data scientists. And so there really isn't a way for us to help answer every question. So the goal, the real question is, how do we use this ecosystem or this platform to really scale? So
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it seems like a very like pragmatic thought process and structure. I guess Lucas, like of course, like folks today have joined to discuss like the self-service analytics aspect of like of your two data organizations. Like Lucas would love to just know like what specific steps like you've taken to enable self-service analytics at Huddle, and how over time, if at all.
So we really, as part of this process, we took a much deeper look into our tool set and whether or not it was meeting the needs internally. So when the data kind of program, if you have it, was set up probably 6-7 years ago, the goal was dump everything in Redshift, kind of this lakehouse concept, let everyone write SQL against it, stand up a tool, everyone go wild. Well, that obviously proliferated itself into a bunch of unmanageable things with everyone coming up with different answers. I bet there are listeners on this webinar that are feeling that pain right now because it was really kind of being pushed in the industry 4 or 5 years ago. And so the real question was, we had to take a journey from that to getting a source of the truth. And so we brought in Looker to do that. And Looker becomes this code-based way of creating BI tools. And that gives you kind of a locked down set of data models that have some overhead to get through, have some specialized training. So your analysts and data scientists become de facto data producers, as Connor said, on domains that maybe they're not deeply understanding. And so we took that journey and said, okay, we're going to decentralize. we're going to really look at how we better serve our various teams. For my team specifically, it's our product team. And to do that, we really wanted to know, was that tool serving our needs? And the answer was, we have a very decentralized, highly autonomous organization. To have a tool that kind of holds insights under lock and key really didn't make sense. And so we then transitioned to a tool really focused on self-service and insights, more so than dashboarding and hardcore code-based repos. We also have DBT as our transform tool. And so we really needed to find a way to kind of open the floodgates on insight production for our various product managers. And so we ended up making a transition over to Tableau, partly because it's widely known. There's YouTube channels, there's training, things like that, that we could then start to kickstart that process of self-service data generation, not ticket-based, go have an analyst chase it down, or point or poke and search, try to figure out what I need to use out of the thousands of tables in my data warehouse. So what we're trying to do is connect our end users with tools that kind of meet their needs and kind of our organizational structure. And that's really the process we've gone through.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, particularly as you start to think about it in the context of like, Whaley, Caster, that sort of thing. And I guess like Connor, kind of like taking it over to your side, like, you mentioned that the team at Fluid Truck is really set up in a hybrid model, and you're adopting a self-service model for analytics and data consumption. How do you ensure that the business teams have the proficiency they need to get the most out of the data, to drill into the asteroid efficiently?
Yeah, great turn back around on the Armageddon analogy. It's a good question. Self-service, like Lucas said, is the nirvana of a reporting team. If you can get others to do your job for you, all the better, right? But it requires a pretty significant degree of trust in your data consumers to know what they're asking and what the output represents. If I ask a sales manager or someone in sales what revenue means, they're going to have a very different answer for me than someone in the accounting department. And that's fine. They use those terms differently, but we have to make sure that if they ever move to a self-service model, or if they become data producers as well as consumers, that they can make those distinctions appropriately when they need to. I think the big problem that my team has, or had, but I think it's still definitely something that's ongoing, is that we're treated as mystics doing some arcane gobbledygook that involves data. And when we provide data to business units with graphs and spreadsheets, they see us as these wizards. But that's really an industry-wide problem, making data more accessible and bridging the understanding gap between a consumer and a producer. I think when we started the Data Champions program, the hypothesis I had was data consumers are very good at compartmentalization. They don't need to understand how a report is built so long as they have it. By embedding these pro users, these data champions throughout the organization, our team creates a mechanism by which we reinforce understanding day to day for every role. If I tell somebody, as the data wizard, right, the mystic on the mountain, what variables go into a given report, they may forget the next day, or they may dismiss it as, well, that's something the wizard knows. I don't need to know that. If one of their peers tells them, someone in the same role, who so happens to be in this program, says, hey, actually, this is how this report is built, well, suddenly the standard for their role has changed. The whole team becomes more holistically proficient, and that becomes a daily part of their rhetoric, their conversation. When I was trying to find candidates for that program, it was pretty straightforward. Every organization has someone who has that drive and ambition to really push their career or understand some new aspect of technology. But if you're looking for sort of specifics on how we make sure data gets into the business's hands, I look for individuals who are seen as tech authorities within their team. Ideally, they have a familiarity with Excel or Google Sheets. That those are great launching pads for understanding basic database concepts. A sheet is a table, a VLOOKUP is a join, so on and so forth. Once we select them, we sort of brought them into the team on this rotational basis for a month. There, they fill the role of an existing BI analyst who then gets to go out and do a rotation with another team. And so during this time, the data champion will work on more basic incoming requests. They'll learn SQL, become familiar with our tech stack, conclude by delivering a request for their team. We actually recently finished a rotation with a new data champion from our fleet management support group. At the end of it, she delivered and showcased a visualization that displayed for our whole fleet what vehicles were not being inspected consistently month over month in a timely fashion and how we can sort of address that. It's a pretty simple visualization and something that's very basic for our organization. But when you think about having to go through the data source and clean it, design the dimensional model, build the queries on which the mart is built, and then go into our visualization tool and actually construct it, suddenly the conversation with fleet management support and business intelligence becomes more authentic. We get to use the same words, the same rhetoric, the same vocabulary with each other, because I can tell our data champion, hey, if you want this new content, this is what we need to do. And she can relate that back to her team. So supporting the data champions then becomes a work of our core cadre of analysts. So instead of consistently having to go through and build content and then rotate in and out of teams, we are getting to sort of work on our standards, build up our tech stack, do code reviews, data governance meetings, and formally train these champions who can represent the organization at a more granular level.
Very cool. And it seems like there's a bit of a flywheel effect there, which I kind of love. And I'm kind of curious as well, like, in order to kind of accomplish that, as well as to scale sort of like this model, the self-service model that you guys have built, like what sorts of tools and technologies have you kind of leaned into and leveraged?
Yeah, so our fundamental strategy is that nothing should happen in a vacuum. Everything should be controlled through version controls. We should provide others in the team the ability to review, approve, merge, deploy. And then our less senior team members should be able to coach our more junior team members and our data champions on this. So as we start to think about those as a set of requirements, then just like Lucas, we love Looker here at Fluid Truck. That is our flagship visualization product, and we're stoked on it. It gives us a lot of opportunities for doing those things with reviews. It gives us a lot of opportunities for access controls, which for our data champions program is huge because there are sensitive aspects of our data warehouse that we do not want everyone to see. And if you're on the fleet management support team, then you shouldn't necessarily be seeing content from HR. So in addition to sort of cataloging that content behind BigQuery's controls, we can also do that in the Looker environment as a double standard, as a redundant standard, I should say. Looker is also great for its explore capabilities. You have sort of this, in addition to a consumer layer, you have sort of this intermediate layer where you're not doing the heavy coding so much, but you're getting to do a lot of that stuff that Power BI and Tableau do with their data producer layers. So that's also very exciting to us. Otherwise, we're pretty much completely a Google shop. BigQuery with a data form integration for our build tools. We use Airflow for our ingestion. So we do that, orchestrate that through Composer. And of course, we use Caster for our governance and enhancing our documentation, which has been super helpful. So I find that sort of stack, just like Lucas was saying, really gives us an opportunity to make sure everything is transparent in the team, while also providing a lot more rigor in terms of providing the BI team the ability to gatekeep without necessarily forcing that conversation on everybody else.
Very cool. And Lucas, like I kind of want to rope you in here a little bit too. At Huddle, like how do you balance data governance with self-service?
Yeah, so I'm going to start kind of general in my answer and then get into specifics. So really push me for specifics if I stay in the clouds. So first of all, I think data governance and self-service are such buzzwordy terms that everyone thinks they're doing it, and very few companies have very specific strategies around it. So at its core, self-service is an opposition to perfect data, and there's some happy middle. And every company undergoes a journey. I've talked to leaders in the space who they started with a completely gatekeeped instance that they're slowly releasing the reins on. When I came to Huddle, I had the exact opposite challenge to solve. I had an ungatekept data environment that we had to start creating clarity around. And so when you really think about the journey and where your company sits in terms of how it historically has approached business intelligence, data warehousing, data management, things like that, I think really kind of drives how you understand the balance. And of course, appetite for risk. So is it more important that your organization is able to literally get at any data they want, unfettered, unrestricted, and start to use it? Or is it more important that those answers are accurate and correct every step of the way? And so when you think of like enabling data governance in this world of complete self-service, where you can literally write a query against any table you want, you have to start connecting those producers and consumers and making sure that your producers really understand who is consuming what data they're producing, how it's being consumed, where it's being consumed. And there are some really cool concepts starting to come up around creating data contracts and that communication. So I think in a fully self-service environment, the cons are everyone is trying to get at whatever data they want to get at any time. How do you facilitate those conversations? How do you make sure that the executive team knows what metric is real, what metric is not? Layer in a decentralized organization, now your challenge gets a little deeper. How then does your head of product know that they go to the head of the product analytics lead for product usage data, but maybe not necessarily pool certain revenue from there? And how do you ensure that the leaders in each of your pods work collaboratively to make sure their teams are using the right data? And I think we're really early days in that process and trying to understand how to keep all those pieces in sync and working together. And so the balance comes down to risk that your organization is willing to take, and then kind of the velocity of insight that needs to happen versus the accuracy of insight, because those two things tend to be opposed.
Yeah, understood. And I appreciate the nuance that you described there, the balance, because it does seem like there are trade-offs to both approaches, and it doesn't seem to be sort of like a one size fits all kind of approach for each organization.
Yeah, and I think one thing to know for anybody listening who's really kind of wrestling with these concepts, your strategy and the tactics you use surrounding that strategy are what's going to solve these problems, not the newest, hottest tool on the market, right? There are basic needs your organizations have, kind of the hierarchy of needs from just a data program perspective. And there are many tools with different customer profiles, different value props, and different use cases. And so just buying something because the industry's using it isn't necessarily the right approach. It's what really meets, as I always like to say, what meets your internal product market fit in terms of what your consumers need to do and how you need to communicate with those data producers and who those producers are. So
that makes sense. Like the output has to be rooted in like business context every day, I think is what you're getting at.
Yep.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I suppose, like, Lucas, I'd like to kind of double click on some of this stuff. Like, what strategies have you found to be effective in really fostering like a data-driven culture? I know that's a bit of a buzzword or buzz term, but just kind of curious there, and what impact those strategies have had on your business goals.
So when you really think of, a data-driven culture, it's when you get to the point where people aren't just making a decision without looking at data. Like, that's step one. It's, are they actually using it to help inform those decisions? And that then becomes its own. I liked your flywheel analogy, Dirk, earlier, where it becomes its own flywheel, right? It's the way I kind of see it is you have raw data, that data gets transformed to some output. In a lot of early stage companies and younger data teams, they think it's all about insight. The big insights are going to win you the day. And those insights can get some momentum. But I think the core of it is really knowing what metrics your company is tracking. That then enables you to evaluate whether or not your strategies are on track or if you need to pivot. From there, you then have these self-service pieces of your platform where people then can say, okay, our goal is to increase MAU, and I'm going to do this thing over here and look at this feature usage and see if I'm moving the needle after release or whatever it might be. And so it becomes this flywheel of somewhat like the scientific method throughout your business. So it's really like, how do you scale curiosity in the scientific method? And so finding those touch points and those, I like the concept of a data champion, or those people who are really more motivated to inject data into their everyday decision-making process and then using them as an example. I jokingly sent one of our PMs who really kind of digs through data for his product line a message the other day with a screenshot of our product management team and how often they're using Tableau and whether or not they're coming back consistently. And I said, hey, look, you're top on the leaderboard for the second straight week. And I saw him in the office yesterday, and he said, you really ought to just like use that competitive drive and just post the leaderboard every week as a way for people to kind of motivate each other. I don't know if that works. If anyone has experience doing some kind of gimmicky thing like that, I'd be curious to see how well it works. But every culture is going to be a little different in terms of how you kind of drive that. And then ultimately, right, the business value is so hard to evaluate from a data perspective. Sometimes it's easy, right? We found this insight, sent it to the sales team, they closed the deal. We've had a couple of those, and those are awesome. But even in B2B SaaS, you're not talking millions of dollars typically from that type of work. You're talking of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of impact. And so the impact in thinking about the value that a data-driven culture is driving you is really in kind of those nuanced weeds of how have you evaluated the risk of a decision you're trying to make? Maybe you're trying to make a pricing decision. What is the upside and downside of that decision you're making? And how do you balance that risk for the business? The value there is not necessarily in the data, but being confident in the decision and being able to measure whether or not it moved the way they thought it was going to move. Other times, it's got a direct result of reducing cost of goods. And so on the various data teams that I've been in, led, we tend to hone in on just one element of that value because it's probably the easiest to measure at the time. We're really thinking more holistically about the value you're there to provide. Is just it's something you really got to think about as a data leader, and self-service absolutely plays into that, because if you've got a team of 5 data analysts, data scientists, and data engineers, and you've got a company of 500 people, and that's a high ratio in today's world, you're still not going to be able to serve all 500 people. So how are you doing things that give those business members confidence in what they're using and drive them towards using it? So you've got a platform that provides value. Measuring it's a whole different ball game that becomes really difficult. I'd be interested, Connor, how you've been successfully been able to measure success of your data teams in the past. I think everybody does it differently, so that'd be kind of cool to hear.
Yeah, I might just jump in here then. I I actually loved your answer there, Lucas, because I think it's about improving the conversations that take place day to day in the office. We're a group that deals in precision, so it's very frustrating to me that I can't point to a quantifiable metric that says our team's existence has provided X number of dollars to the company or improved efficiencies by X percentage. But when I see our leaders, whereas 2 years ago, the conversation was very much, I feel, or this is how we should do it because this is how we've done in the past. The conversation seems to follow the scientific method a lot more, where it's starting with a hypothesis, right? Okay, I think we should make this business decision and move with this feature on the product side, and then executing on that hypothesis by asking additional questions, gathering data, doing A/B testing, evaluating what that feature implementation would look like in reality, and then measuring results from that. We're getting better at that, and I think it's going to be a permanent process for Fluid Truck. But it's very exciting to see that tonal shift, not just at the highest levels of the company, but all across the company. When I first started my career in data, one of my early mentors recommended this book to me, What the CEO Wants You to Know. It's by a man named Ram Charan. The book talks about the CEO basically lives their life by a few KPIs and metrics, and those KPIs and metrics are important to them because they're important to the health of the company. And it's basic things like cash flow, where we're doing well, where we're not doing well, what geographies we need to tighten up and work on. And I think having data available and accessible across the company means everyone knows what the CEO wants them to know. If our gross rental revenue is down month over month, we should know that. If our seasonality is being impacted differently than it has been in prior years, that sort of conversation should be a hallway conversation, not just something you have to plan for and prep for when you have your biweekly one-on-one with the C-suite. That's the sort of, feely, emotional, not quantifiable answer to that question of how I measure success. But of course, I'm always proud to see somebody bringing numbers to a meeting or showing a graph that one of our team members made or they made themselves. So I think it's tough to measure it because all of our data initiatives have sort of this expectation that they will deliver a result and make a decision, allow a decision to be made. So it's the decision being made that's the result of that. But it's something we need to work on.
Super cool. Yeah, and I guess like Lucas, I'd like to rope you in here too. And Connor, thanks so much for such a deep sort of answer there around some of the processes and like outcomes that you guys have been able to accomplish. I guess Lucas, like, what are some of the main challenges that you've or that you faced in your self-service initiative? Just kind of curious, how you've overcome them at Hudl.
Yeah. So first of all, I think self-service initiatives, no matter if you're a 130-year-old Fortune 500 company or a 2-year-old startup, self-service is always going to have challenges. Right. I kind of talked about one of my early mentors said, Lucas, you're never going to have perfect self-service if you want perfect data governance, because the two goals, perfect data, one source of the truth, and self-service, are by nature at odds of each other. The reality is somewhere in the middle. And every company is constantly undergoing cultural shifts and cultural norm in terms of how they think about decision making, how they think about interacting with data. And so where the challenges I'm facing today are substantially different than the challenges that I was facing, let's say, 2 years ago at Hudl. And so when you think of, self-service, you first have to start with a strategy and a definition around self-service, because everyone has their own opinion of what that means. We have some people who think self-service means I can get access to anything anytime I want and create whatever metric I need to do my job. Like, that's one definition of self-service. On the flip side, at one point we were undergoing kind of a definition of self-service of you can only trust the things that are in the BI tool. So as long as you're using your Explorer capability in that BI tool, then you know it's right. And so self-service is being able to leverage the insights and data visualization capabilities of that tool. In reality, when you think of self-service, it is how are our business leaders, business managers able to integrate various measures, various analyses, various insights into their day-to-day process and operation in ways that they just don't have to go to a Slack channel and ask for something with their hair on fire, right? I've got a board meeting. I need these numbers. Can you get them to me? I'm so sorry, right? I think every data professional has had that conversation. And so some of the challenges we really face are like, how do you define what self-service is and be very specific? And there's a lot of power in talking to a lot of people throughout the organization and just kind of repeating what that strategy is. Is the strategy self-service means everyone writes SQL? If so, do your programs line up to that? For us right now, it's trying to journey away from self-service as everyone writes SQL to self-service as we have a mound of data assets that people don't have to take that painstaking time and effort to understand the core data. They have a set of things available to them that is relevant to their day-to-day that they can begin to leverage the capabilities of our BI tool versus the opposite approach of everyone writes SQL. And so I think how you start to frame up your definition of self-service and really then dictates what tool should you use. So for us, the tool choice really is heading down the Tableau route because of its visualization capabilities and our ability to manage our assets through dbt. For other companies, it could be, like Connor said, it could be Looker, because Looker allows them that level of control to also enable their version of self-service. And so I think the biggest challenge is getting everyone on the same page of what self-service means. And again, like everything in data, it's more cultural than technology. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like how you kind of like set the ground, establish that, like self-service is different for every organization. And so depending on what the definition is, then effectively, you can make the decision that's right for you. I guess like, in closing here, would be kind of curious, Connor, Lucas, as to sort of the advice that you would give to other data leaders who are really looking to jumpstart self-service, whatever that might mean for them, and really drive like, data-driven approach and data adoption within their organizations.
Sure. I think as this call has sort of demonstrated, and I like the way Lucas approaches it, everyone defines self-service differently. So you really need to sort of hone in on what your expectation for self-service is, whether that's going to be writing SQL scripts. Everyone's a proficient user in query language of whatever database system you're using, or there's some sort of intermediary layer like Looker's Explore layer where people can use pre-built assets to sort of mix and match things in this pseudo visualization build tool. Or if it's simply there's enough visualized or pre-built content out there that finding what you need is as simple as searching it up and downloading it into Excel. For us at Fluid Truck, I think this hybrid model where we have these sanctioned users who are proficient and are moderated by a more professional cadre of analytics users, it works for us. And for that, if you're interested in pursuing that within your own organization, my only advice would be your organization, if it's sufficiently sized enough, probably already has that talent within it. There's never a need, in my opinion, to look outside for a data champion. You've got folks who are hungry, want more responsibility, leverage that. Find the people who really would jump at the chance to do more with their professional career and help them along, and they'll set an example for others to follow.
That's really great advice. What I really like is, finding those anchor people within your organization that are kind of your, as you say, champions or your biggest supporters, and really leveraging them as you scale. But if I think about starting up a self-service initiative, I'm going to borrow from Simon Sinek a little bit, start with the why. You really need to understand what is the motivation for any type of self-service initiative. A bad why is because my data team says I need self-service. And I've seen it quite a few times. Like, you get a vendor in, they make a really compelling case for why your company needs self-service. And so then you go pursue self-service, but there's no internal desire for self-service, or you don't have an executive champion who's going to help promote your concepts. And so I really see it as kind of almost an internal market research activity, where you go and you try to find what are the pain points in terms of decision making, and how then does self-service fit, and how does that help define your company's definition of self-service. That's where I think you start. And then from there, you start small, under promise, over deliver, and go that route. I think I'm probably speaking for many data leaders, is that early in your data leadership career, you're going to over promise and under deliver. Try not to make that mistake. That is always the toughest one not to do. So.
So I really appreciate both of y'all's perspectives here, whether it's like internal champion, like identification and building, or if it's, I think to your point, Lucas, like, honing in on sort of like what the self-service aspect means for your organization. And then one of the things that I'm kind of reading between the lines here too with your statement as well is like tying that self-service aspect to underlying business metrics, positive business outcomes that impact the organization at large. And of course, and I think this applies to any role, like under promising, over delivering, right? As opposed to the inverse. So really appreciate both of y'all, here. I did see one question in the chat that I'd be remiss if we didn't get to. So let's see here. So the first question, I believe, is, and I'll throw this back to y'all, like, what standard JDBC data feed to S3 or otherwise do you recommend product teams implement that would enable default connectors like Fivetran, MuleSoft, Power BI connectors to pull data for BI use cases and systems?
So I think what this question is asking is, how do you integrate data sources into a space that you can do reporting on them? What's the best approach? And my take on the question is, there's really not going to be a specific answer for this. It's going to sort of depend on your source. For us, I don't think I've ever used JDBC, and if you're using JDBC, you probably got some legacy systems that you're sort of responsible for. But for us, we take sort of a lakehouse approach. So we put everything inside BigQuery, and then we have a sort of, if it's coming in as JSON or as Rotobuf or whatever format, it just goes into its raw state there. We parse it out into a string, and then we do transformations on it using our build tool, Dataform. From there, we sort of move it into its own space where our analysts have access to that cleaned data and they can build on that. In terms of how we actually do that, that's going to vary source by source. So we have some REST, some SOAP APIs we pull in through Airflow. We have some old Postgres sources that we need to pull in through Dataflow, and all that's orchestrated from Composer. But the new exciting big thing in at least BigQuery space is a federated querying, which allows sort of this live connection to outside sources. So we're looking at a lot of different things there, but there's not going to really be a singular, you need to pull everything using Composer into a cloud bucket or an S3 bucket in an AWS ecosystem, and then pull that in a specific way. I think from our point of view, we just pull everything in and work it out as we can.
Yeah, we take that approach as well. I think one thing to note on that decision, it becomes unique to every organization. The fastest way to get data from, let's say, Salesforce is going to be connecting directly from your BI tool to Salesforce. The problem becomes you then have less ability to actually govern what goes on in terms of how metrics are created on top of it, how people are accessing it and using it. Integration becomes even more difficult. And when you do integrate using those direct connectors, you end up getting siloed logic inside your BI tool. One thing to be really careful of is tools today have made it very easy to grab and go with data. You got to think about what are the integration requirements needed. If you need to integrate with other sources, the warehouse is going to be the best place to do that integration, or some kind of data pipeline, let's say, that does the integration for you, depending on your organization strategy around it. One approach we take with Fivetran at Hudl is Fivetran is for those solved use cases that we really don't need to be spending the bandwidth for our data engineering team to produce and manage internal pipelines. Anytime you create and produce internal pipelines, it's going to cause way more headache, way more fires, and way more scaling issues than if you use pre-built things. And so it really becomes a conscious decision rather than a passive decision. There are other pipelines that we have with proprietary data that we want to make sure we capture logic, enable self-service for engineers, things like that, that Fivetran just does not provide the level of control that we want around it. And so really making those conscious decisions, I think, are the best way to think of your internal organization and how you want to use those. There's no industry standard. Every vendor is going to give you their opinion that fits their tool the best. Have your own strategy and stick to it. Don't constantly flip-flop.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on the Fivetran note there because that's a great way to implement Fivetran. It can be a little bit more pricey than like your Airbyte, but it's really not worth the headache. And especially since the person who asked the question talked about a JDBC, so I'm assuming they're using Java or an Oracle database. So they're probably also using NetSuite as part of their accounting suite. Like don't use Oracle's REST API for NetSuite. Just use Fivetran. The $300 a month is well worth the price than having to painfully beat your head against the wall trying to figure out how Oracle, a huge tech company like Oracle, has dropped the ball so hard with NetSuite's API.
Yeah. Well, and you really think about a modern B2B or B2C tech stack from sales to marketing to finance. You start stacking 5 or 6 connectors on there, and cost scales very effectively in a tool like a Fivetran. Because if you really think about it, you're going to need multiple data engineers to manage that many pipelines, most likely, especially like Connor said, with the complexities of each one's API and having somebody really understand and learn it. And so I think Fivetran becomes really effective for some of those cost savings at the expense of control and sometimes visibility.
Yeah, 100%. As a former Fivetran employee, you guys are tickling my funny bone here. So the last question here is, I think, how important would you say that adoption of your chosen tool is versus having people using the data in the tool that suits them? If y'all are okay with this, I'd like to field this from the caster perspective inside. So we believe very strongly that adoption of data catalogs can be tough. We believe very strongly that self-service analytics can be tough. Um, but and whatever that means for each organization is a little bit different. But one of the things that Caster has rolled out recently to combat both of these and make things easier on this front to kind of break down those tribal knowledge silos and get folks to use um, data in the tool that suits them, as well as the adoption of a specific tool, is the ability to push documentation and insights from the data catalog directly into those other tools and meet users where they are, whether that be Looker or Tableau, DBT, or your data warehouse of choice. And the idea here is that users can feel empowered in sort of like the rotating hub and spoke model, I think, that you mentioned, Connor, and can broaden sort of their influence to those different teams, and be more effective. And Lucas, I think to your point, like depending on sort of like how self-service analytics is really defined at the organization, you can really empower each person to kind of take part in that sort of thing. So I think with that being said, I think we're just at about time. Connor, really appreciate your time today. Lucas, really appreciate yours. Great to see you both. And thanks everyone for joining.